The iron of the Winchester rifle was cold against Ara Voss's palms, slick with sweat. Her hands shook. She could not stop them from shaking. The sun beat down on Broken Ridge like a hammer on an anvil. August heat, the kind that makes men mean and women desperate. Dust hung in the air, golden, thick enough to taste. 12 men on horseback, moving slow up the trail, deliberate, like wolves who know the rabbit has nowhere left to run. Ara stood on the porch she had built with her own blistered hands. The porch where every nail she had driven still held. The boards under her bare feet were warm, solid, real. Her belly was enormous, nearly 9 months gone. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if it could feel the danger, as if it knew. Behind the 12 riders, the white flag with the red bird snapped in the wind, wings spread wide, rope broken at the talons. Free. She had sewn that flag 3 weeks ago, from the black morning dress she wore the day she arrived. The day she thought she was running toward safety. She had been wrong about safety, but she had been right about freedom. Garrett Sinclair rode at the front, tall in the saddle, his suit gray even in this heat. Not a speck of dust on him, his horse was hired. She could tell by the way he sat. A man who owned things but did not work for them. Next to him rode Silas Whitmore, younger, smiling. The smile of a man who had never been told no and lived. Behind them, 10 more Bowen, sheriff, deputies, men who took orders and did not ask questions. All of them had guns drawn. Ara raised the rifle. Her arms trembled with the weight. The baby shifted, pressed against her bladder. She ignored it. The men stopped, 20 yards out, close enough to see her face, far enough to feel safe. Garrett dismounted, slow. His boots hit the dirt without sound. He brushed dust from his jacket that was not there. A habit, a performance. His voice carried on the wind, soft, gentle. The voice he used when he wanted the world to see how reasonable he was. Ara, put the gun down. You don't want to do something foolish. Not in your condition. Her finger found the trigger. The metal was warm from her hand. I already did the most foolish thing of my life, Garrett. That was believing you. Silas shifted in his saddle. His hand rested on his pistol. Casual, like a man touching his watch. Mrs. Kane, the territorial court has issued an order. You need to come with us. The law is the law. Your law doesn't mean anything on federal land. Garrett took a step forward. Just one. Testing. Last chance, Ara. Come down, or we come up and bring you down. The wind gusted. The red bird flag cracked like a whip. Ara's voice broke. Not from fear, from rage held too long. I ran 1,000 miles to get away from you. If I die today, I die here. But you die first. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Freeze that moment. That breath. That choice. The woman standing on the porch with a rifle and a swollen belly and nowhere left to run. Remember her face, because 3 months ago she was not that woman. 3 months ago she could barely lift her eyes from the ground. 3 months earlier. June 1886. The train wheels screamed against iron rails. Slowing, stopping. The sound cut through Ara like a knife through butter. Elk Crossing, Wyoming territory. She stood on the platform with one hand pressed against her belly. 6 months along, the baby had started to show. No hiding it now. Not that she wanted to hide it. This baby was all she had left of Thaddeus. The platform was nothing. A few boards, a post with the town name carved crooked into wood. The kind of place trains stopped because they had to, not because anyone wanted to be there. Heat pressed down, thick, heavy. The air tasted of rust and sage and something sharp. Metal, the rails singing their last note before going silent. Her dress was black. Full mourning. 4 months since Thaddeus died. 4 months since the world went dark and stayed dark. She carried one bag, canvas, worn. Everything she owned fit inside. Everything she had left after she cut her hair and stole money and ran. In her other hand, a letter. Folded so many times the creases were soft as cloth. The paper thin where her thumb had rubbed the same words. Over and over. 47 times she had read it. On trains, in boarding houses, in the dark. She could recite it with her eyes closed. The handwriting was plain, no flourishes. The letters leaned right, pressed hard into the paper. Grooves you could feel with your fingertips. A man who meant what he wrote. I have a cabin, 40 acres on top of a ridge. Federal homestead, legal, filed. There is a cook stove, a spring behind the house, and a door that locks from the inside. I am not looking for a woman to own. I am looking for someone who wants to start over, in a place where nobody knows her name. If that sounds like something you need, write back. Josiah Kane. She had answered from a rented room in St. Louis, the last of the money she took from Garrett's desk scattered on a table, counting coins, deciding between food and postage. She chose postage. Her reply was 3 sentences, written in a hand she forced steady. I need the door that locks. I can cook and mend and work. I do not scare easy. Ara Voss. She had not told him about Thaddeus, about the baby, about the contract her father signed in a whiskey haze, about the 2 years before Thaddeus, the years in Garrett's house. She had not told him about the scar on her wrist. She folded the letter, put it in her pocket, looked at Elk Crossing. One street, dirt, 20 buildings hunched along it like men leaning into wind, a dry goods store, a livery, a saloon with doors open and piano music leaking out, thin, tuneless, a church at the far end, white steeple too clean for the rest. Nobody came to greet her. A few faces in doorways, watching, the way people watch stray animals, deciding if they are a nuisance or a threat. Ara kept her eyes forward, hands still. Then a girl appeared, small, thin, maybe 14, brown hair pulled back tight, eyes that moved too fast, the way eyes move when they have learned to watch for danger before it arrives. The girl wore a dress 2 sizes too large, boots that belonged to someone else. You the mail-order bride. The words landed like a slap. Ara looked at her. I am waiting for Josiah Kane. I know, he sent me. His pack horse got loose down by South Creek. He is chasing it through the brush. He said to tell you he will be here before dark, and that he is sorry. Who are you, Chine? Nettie Barlow. My uncle runs the forge. She pointed to a squat building near the livery. Metal on metal rang out, slow, steady, like a heartbeat. You want water? You look like you are about to fall over. I am fine. You are not fine. You have been standing in July sun for 2 hours in a black dress. Your lips are cracked. Come sit in the shade at least. Ara almost refused, almost, but her body made the decision her pride would not. She followed Nettie to a narrow strip of shadow beside the dry goods store. Sat, felt her legs stop trembling. Nettie brought water in a tin cup. It tasted of rust and salvation. While Ara drank, the door of the dry goods store opened. A woman stepped out, 50 maybe, but the years sat on her like armor. Deliberate, a uniform of authority. Her bonnet was white, pressed sharp. Her dress was dark blue, buttoned to the throat despite the heat. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her eyes held the particular coldness of a person who had confused cruelty with righteousness so long ago, she could no longer tell them apart. You are the one, not a question. Ara set down the cup. I beg your pardon. Josiah Kane's mail-order bride. I heard the ticket was purchased 3 weeks ago. News travels in a town this size. The woman looked Ara over, head to boots, the way a person examines livestock. Where are you from, East? East is large. I asked where, and I answered. The woman's mouth thinned. She turned to Nettie. Does your uncle know you are running errands for Josiah Kane? Nettie's face went blank, the practiced blankness of a girl who has learned to make herself invisible. I was just bringing water, Mrs. Whitmore. Go home, Nettie. Nettie glanced at Ara. Something passed between them. Not friendship yet, but recognition. One girl who knew what it meant to be watched. Another who knew what it meant to be controlled. Nettie left. But she looked back once from the corner of the livery. Ara held her gaze until the girl disappeared. Edna Whitmore turned back to Ara. Josiah Kane is a strange man, miss. Whatever your name is. He lives alone on a hill. Refuses every offer of fellowship this town extends. My son Silas offered him a partnership 6 months ago. Fair and generous. Mr. Kane refused without so much as a handshake. Perhaps he had his reasons. Perhaps he did. And perhaps a woman who arrives with one bag and no family and no name anyone has heard of has her reasons too. Edna leaned in. Her breath smelled of cloves and judgment. Elk Crossing is a Christian town, Miss Voss. We look after our own, and we notice what does not belong. Ara met her eyes. She had spent 2 years being measured by a man who believed ownership was the same as love. She knew the weight of another person's gaze when it was designed to make her feel small. She had stopped shrinking a long time ago. Then you will notice me. Edna Whitmore held the stare for 3 seconds. Then she turned, walked back into the dry goods store. The door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Ara sat in the shade, pressed her palms against her knees to stop them from shaking. Not from fear, from the effort of standing still when every nerve in her body was screaming at her to run. She did not run. She had done enough running. The sun was touching the ridge line when Josiah Kane arrived. He came on a bay horse, a pack horse trailing behind, both animals dusty and tired. He was not what she had imagined. She had pictured someone larger, someone whose presence announced itself. Josiah Kane was lean, not tall, 5'10" maybe, dark hair pushed back from a face that had been burned brown by years of weather. His shirt was plain, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Where the cotton pulled tight across his back, she could see a scar running along his left shoulder blade. Long and pale, the kind a blade makes. His hands were rough, his eyes were gray. Not the bright gray of storm clouds. The gray of river stones worn smooth by things that had passed over them. He dismounted, stood in front of her. He did not smile, did not extend his hand. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. Without asking questions he is not sure he has earned. You are Ara. I am. I am Josiah. Your luggage. Ara lifted the single canvas bag at her feet. He looked at it, then at her. Something moved behind his eyes, a calculation that was not suspicion, something closer to sadness. Light traveling. Yes. He took the bag, strapped it to the pack horse. He did not touch her, did not offer his arm or his hand. He swung on to his horse, held the reins of hers. A calm sorrel mare, waited while she mounted. Mounting was harder than it used to be. The baby made everything harder. But she managed, settled into the saddle, found the rhythm. Josiah waited until she was ready. Then he turned north toward the ridge. They rode. They did not speak for the first mile. The trail climbed through scrub brush and dry grass. The mountains ahead turning purple as the light drained from the sky. Ara listened to the horses breathe, to the creak of leather, to the distant sound of the creek running somewhere below through rocks. She wanted to ask him 100 things. She asked none of them. Because for the first time in 3 months, in the rhythm of the horse beneath her, in the silence of the man ahead, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Not safety, not yet, but the absence of threat. The simple, enormous relief of being near a person who was not calculating how to use her. The cabin appeared as they crested the ridge. It sat in the center of a clearing, surrounded by wildflowers that had dried gold in the summer heat. Pine logs, stone chimney, a half-finished porch with boards stacked neatly beside it. Small, plain, solid, built by hands that cared more about function than appearance. Josiah helped her down. His hands went to her waist. Brief, firm, respectful, then withdrew. He pointed to the door. Water is from the spring out back. Cook's stove still has heat from this morning. There is stew in the pot, bread on the table. He paused, reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, iron, heavy, old-fashioned. He held it out to her. Door locks from the inside, like I wrote. Ara took the key. Their fingers did not touch. We are not sharing the bed. Not a question, a line drawn in the air between them. Josiah looked at her, no surprise, no offense, no flicker of the entitlement she had learned to read in men's faces the way other women read weather. I put the advertisement in the paper because I needed someone here. Not in my bed, on this land. When you are ready to call this something more than an arrangement, I will know. There is no rush. I have been alone for 3 years. A few more months sleeping on the porch will not kill me. He turned toward the barn, stopped. One more thing, I do not ask questions about where people come from. Out here, a person is who they are today. Yesterday does not live on this ridge unless you bring it. He walked away. Ara stood in the doorway, holding the key. The cabin smelled of pine and wood smoke and the ghost of bread baked that morning. She stepped inside. One room, a cot with a wool blanket, a table with two chairs. The cook stove still warm, on a single shelf against the wall. Three objects: a Bible with a cracked spine, a tin-type photograph in a wooden frame, a child's carved horse, small enough to fit in a palm. She moved closer to the photograph. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes held an infant against her chest. The woman was looking at the camera with an expression Ara recognized. Trust, complete unguarded trust in whoever stood on the other side of the lens. Ara set the photograph down. Did not touch it again. She ate the stew standing at the table, because sitting felt too much like staying. And she was not sure yet if she was staying or merely pausing between one danger and the next. She ate fast, the way people eat when they have learned that food can be taken away. Then she locked the door. She tested it, pushed against it, pulled. The iron bolt held. She pressed her forehead against the wood, breathed. The last door she had stood behind was in Garrett Sinclair's house in St. Louis, a door with a lock on the outside. She had memorized the sound of that lock turning, the click that meant another night of wondering whether he would come in, whether his footsteps would stop outside or continue past, whether his mood would be the cold, quiet kind, or the other kind, the kind that left marks. This lock was different. This lock answered to her hand and no one else's. Ara lay on the cot. The wool blanket smelled of soap and open air. Through the window she could see stars appearing one by one over the ridge, fierce and silent. She could hear Josiah moving on the porch, settling in for the night, the creak of wood, the sound of a man pouring water. Then nothing, just breathing, steady, unhurried. A man with no intention of opening her door. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 2 years, she slept without dreaming of locks. She woke to the sound of hammering, steady, rhythmic, unhurried, the sound of a nail finding its place in wood. Ara sat up. Morning light came through the window, sharp and gold. She dressed, walked outside. Josiah was crouched at the far end of the porch frame, fitting a board into place. His shirt was already damp. The scar on his shoulder blade stretched tight every time he raised the hammer. He did not look up. Coffee is on the stove. Bread is on the table. Ara ate, drank the coffee, which was strong and bitter and tasted like something a person made for himself without caring whether anyone else would like it. She came back outside, stood on the unfinished porch, watching him work. I want to learn. Josiah drove one more nail. Then he stood, walked to her, held the hammer out, handle first. Grip it near the end, not the middle. Let the weight work for you. She took it. The heft was different from anything she had carried before. Buckets, irons, trays, all tools of maintenance. This was a tool of creation. Her hand closed around the handle. Something shifted inside her chest, small and unnamed, like a seed turning in dark soil. She set a nail. She swung. The head glanced sideways. The nail bent. That is one, Josiah said. No judgment, no correction, just counting. She pulled the bent nail. Tried again. The second strike was true. The nail sank into wood. The vibration ran up her arm and into her ribs, and she felt it there. Solid, real. Hers. The days took shape around work. Josiah showed her how to measure boards, how to test a joint, how to shave an edge with a plane. He never took a tool from her hands. If she struggled, he waited. If she asked, he demonstrated once and stepped back. They built in silence mostly. Two people learning the architecture of shared space without needing to name it. By the 5th day, her hands were covered in blisters. By the 10th, they had hardened to calluses. By the 15th, she could drive a nail in 3 strikes. The baby grew. Her belly swelled. She worked slower, sat more, but she did not stop. Because every nail she drove was a nail driven by her own hand. Every board she laid was a board she chose to lay. And that made all the difference. Nettie came on the 3rd day. She arrived on foot, with a basket of bread. and a face full of things she wanted to say but would not say, in front of adults she did not trust yet. Ara noticed the bruise on the girl's forearm, yellow-green and fading, the kind that comes from fingers gripping too hard. She noticed the way Nettie flinched when a board fell from the stack and hit the ground with a bang. She did not ask. Not yet. She poured Nettie water. Let the girl sit on the porch and watch them work. And when Nettie reached for a nail and held it up with a question in her eyes, Ara handed her the hammer. On the fifth day, Nettie told her about Silas Whitmore. They were sitting on the finished section of porch, legs hanging over the edge, while Josiah split wood near the barn. Nettie spoke quietly, not from shyness, from practice, from knowing that certain words carried weight in a town where walls were thin and loyalty was bought. Silas runs everything, not officially. His father has the pulpit, his mother has the churchwomen. But Silas holds the money, mine contracts, lumber permits, the trade route through the peonies. If Silas does not approve a business, it does not survive winter. What does that have to do with Josiah? 3 months before you came, Silas offered Josiah a deal. Let Silas use Broken Ridge as a supply station for the northern trade route. In exchange, Josiah gets protection and supplies. Josiah said no. And since then, no one in town will sell to Josiah. My uncle will not forge nails for him. The dry goods store will not fill his orders. Silas is squeezing him. Why did Josiah say no? Because Josiah does not answer to anyone, and Silas cannot stand a man he cannot control. Ara felt the shape of something forming, a picture larger than one cabin on a ridge. Why are you telling me this? Nettie was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that dropped through Ara like a stone through still water. Because the last girl who said no to Silas disappeared. The words hung between them. Her name was Caroline Meeks. She worked at the trading post. Silas wanted to court her. She refused. Everyone says she left town one night, just packed up and went east. You do not believe it. No, because she left her mother's ring behind. I found it. Not at her cabin, at my uncle's forge, buried in the ash pit. Ara felt the hair rise on her arms despite the heat. Nettie, does anyone else know this? No. Why are you telling me? Nettie looked at her with eyes too old for 14. Because you have a door that locks from the inside. And because you are the first person who ever handed me a hammer instead of telling me to go home. That night after Nettie left, after the stars came out, after Josiah settled into his place on the porch, Ara lay in the cot staring at the ceiling. She pressed the key against her palm until the iron teeth bit into skin. She had come here to hide, to put 1,000 miles between herself and Garrett Sinclair, and the contract her father had signed with shaking hands while the whiskey made the room spin. She had come to disappear. But Elk Crossing was not empty ground. It was a town with its own predator, its own silences, its own girls who vanished and left rings behind in ash pits. And Josiah Kane, the man who had offered her a locked door and asked nothing in return, had not told her the whole truth either, because Nettie had said one more thing before she left, standing at the gate with the sun behind her, her voice barely above a breath. Josiah did not put that advertisement in the paper because he was lonely. He put it in because he knows Silas is coming for this land, and a man living alone on a ridge is easy to erase. But a man with a wife, a family, that is a homestead. That is federal protection. That is a name on a record that someone would have to explain if it disappeared. Ara closed her eyes. You are not his bride, Nettie had whispered. You are his witness. The key pressed harder into Ara's palm. Outside, the wind moved through the meadow grass. The cabin creaked. Josiah's breathing was steady on the porch, and somewhere far to the east, in a city she had fled with stolen money and a stolen name, Garrett Sinclair was turning over a photograph of a woman with short, dark hair, asking questions that would eventually lead him here. Ara did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the distance closing. Ara did not confront Josiah at breakfast. She sat across the table from him, ate the bread he had baked, drank the coffee he had boiled, and studied his hands while he was not looking. They were the hands of a man who had built things alone for a long time, scarred across the knuckles, nails cracked from work, steady in the way that only grief or discipline can make a person steady. She waited until they were on the porch, until the hammer was in her hand and a nail was set and the morning sun had climbed high enough to burn the dew from the meadow grass. Then she drove the nail in one clean strike. Without turning around, she said, "You did not bring me here to be your wife." Josiah's hammer stopped mid-swing. "You brought me here to be proof that you exist, so that when Silas Whitmore comes for this land, there is a name beside yours on the record. A family. Something federal that cannot be erased without someone asking questions." She pulled another nail from the tin, set it against the board. Her hands were not shaking. She would not allow them to shake. "Tell me I am wrong." Josiah lowered the hammer to his side. He did not look away from her, did not shift or stammer or reach for an excuse. He stood in the morning light with sawdust on his sleeves and the weight of 3 years of solitude pressing down on his shoulders. And he told her the truth. "You are not wrong." The words landed clean between them. No apology wrapped around them. No softening. "When I first put the advertisement in the paper, I was thinking about the land, about Silas and his contracts, and his mother and his father on that pulpit every Sunday telling the town that God rewards obedience, meaning obedience to the Whitmores." He set his hammer on the porch rail. "I knew he wanted this ridge. I knew a man alone up here was a problem he could solve quietly. So yes, I needed a name beside mine. I needed someone the territory would notice if she vanished." Ara drove the second nail. The sound rang across the clearing and scattered a pair of finches from the roof beam. "But then your letter came," Josiah said, "and you did not ask me how much money I had. You did not ask about the size of the cabin or the number of cattle. You asked about the lock on the door." His voice changed, dropped lower, quieter. "And I knew you were running from something that had hands." Ara's jaw tightened. She could feel him watching her. Not her body, her stillness. The way she held herself when certain words got too close. "I should have told you before you got on that train. I know that. I wrote the letter 3 times and threw it away 3 times because I could not figure out how to say I need you here without it sounding like I was using you." He paused. "Because I was using you, and I am not proud of it." The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere a hawk cried, high and sharp. "But I am telling you now, and I am telling you that somewhere between your first letter and your last, the reason changed. I did not just need a witness. I needed someone to hand a hammer to, and you needed a door that locked." He looked at her straight on. "That is not a transaction. That is 2 people who ran out of options, finding the same piece of ground." Ara stared at the nail she had just driven. Flush with the wood. Perfect. Her hands knew what to do even when the rest of her did not. "I could leave." "You could. I could walk down that ridge and get on the next train and you would never hear from me again. You could do that too." She turned, looked at him. His gray eyes held nothing back. No manipulation, no pleading, just a man standing in the ruins of his own honesty, waiting to see what she would build from it or whether she would walk away. "But there is nowhere to go," Ara said. The words came out quieter than she intended, because they carried the full weight of what she had not yet told him. Garrett Sinclair, the contract, the scar on her wrist, the fact that somewhere east of here a man with money and patience and a piece of paper that claimed ownership of her future was looking, always looking. "There is nowhere to go," she said again, "and this porch is not finished." She turned back to the board, pulled another nail from the tin. Josiah picked up his hammer. They worked without speaking for the rest of the morning. The silence between them was different now. Before it had been the silence of strangers measuring distance. Now it was the silence of 2 people who had seen the worst of each other's math and decided to keep building anyway. By noon, 3 new boards were laid. Ara stood on them barefoot, felt the wood warm and solid beneath her feet. Something she had made, something that would hold. Garrett Sinclair came to Elk Crossing on a Tuesday. He came alone. That was the first thing Ara noticed when Nettie brought the news, and it frightened her more than if he had brought an army. Garrett Sinclair did not need men behind him. He had never needed force. Force was crude. Force left marks that other people could see. Garrett preferred the kind of violence that happened inside a person's mind, the slow dismantling of certainty, the patient erosion of will, until the woman standing in front of him began to wonder whether the cage she lived in was actually a cage at all, or just a room she had chosen to stay in. Nettie arrived at dawn, running, out of breath. "He is here," she said, hands on her knees, gasping. "The man from St. Louis, city clothes, staying at the boarding house above the saloon." Agra felt her stomach drop. When bam, yesterday evening, he ate breakfast with Silas this morning. They talked for an hour. Of course they did. Two predators recognizing the same hunger across a table, one who controlled through money and charm and the meticulous architecture of ownership, one who controlled through commerce and church and the simple brutal economics of a town too small to resist. They were not the same species of cruelty, but they spoke the same language. What did they talk about? I do not know, but Silas was smiling when they finished, and Garrett paid for both their meals. Ara sat down on the porch steps. The baby kicked, hard, as if it could sense her fear. Josiah came out of the barn, saw Nettie, saw Ara's face. "What happened?" "The man who thinks he owns me just had breakfast with the man who wants your land." Josiah was very still for 3 seconds. Then he went back into the barn. When he came out, he was carrying his Winchester rifle and a pistol he strapped to his belt. "He is not taking you. You do not know what he is capable of." "I know what I am capable of." Ara stood, put her hand on his arm. The muscle beneath her palm was hard as iron. "Josiah, he has money, he has lawyers, he has a piece of paper my father signed that says I belong to him. You cannot shoot money and lawyers." "I can shoot the man holding them." "And then what? You hang for murder, and Silas takes the land anyway." Josiah looked at her, really looked, and she saw something shift behind his eyes. "What do you want to do?" No one had asked her that in 2 years. What do you want to do? Not what should you do, not what you have to do, not what is best. What do you want? "I want to fight," Ara said, "but I want to win." Josiah nodded, once, sharp. "Then we fight smart." Garrett came on the third day. Ara was in the cabin when she smelled him. Bergamot and cedar, the scent she would know in the dark. In a crowd, across a decade. Her body went rigid before her mind caught up. The baby kicked so hard she gasped. She went to the window. He rode a hired horse up the ridge trail, dressed as though he were attending a business meeting in a city that did not exist for 500 miles in any direction. Gray suit, white shirt, a cravat pinned with silver. His boots were polished. His hair was combed. His hands held the reins with the casual ease of a man who had learned to ride for the aesthetics of it rather than the necessity. Josiah was at the fence line, mending a post. He saw Garrett, set down his tools, walked to the cabin. He did not run, did not rush. He walked like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet and would defend it. Ara met him at the door. "Stay inside," he said in Noir. "Hapoyu." "No, if he came all this way, it is for me, and I will not hide." She stepped onto the porch. Josiah followed, close enough to reach, far enough to give her space. Garrett stopped his horse 10 feet from the gate. He dismounted. Slow, every movement deliberate, every gesture composed for an audience. He brushed dust from his jacket that was not there. A habit, a performance. Then his eyes found Ara, and he smiled. It was the smile she knew better than any other expression in the world. Warm, open, reaching his eyes in a way that fooled everyone who did not know that warmth could be a weapon, that openness could be a trap, that a smile could be the door of a cage swinging wide to let you think you were free. "Ara," he said, her name the way he always said it, with a softness that made it sound like a prayer. "You look well." "Do not." The smile flickered, the smallest crack. He recovered instantly. "I did not come to fight. I came to talk. Surely after everything we have shared, you can give me that." "And we did not share anything. You took, and I survived." Garrett's jaw tightened, just a fraction. The movement that preceded a shift in strategy. The slight recalibration of a man adjusting his approach the way a marksman adjusts for wind. "I see you have been rehearsing. That is fine. You always were dramatic, Ara. It was one of the things I found charming." Josiah moved from the porch to the gate. He did not rush. He planted himself in front of it with his feet set wide, and he looked at Garrett Sinclair with the flat, measuring regard of a man who has seen violence and does not fear it, but does not seek it either. State your business. Garrett looked at him, a long, slow appraisal that moved from Josiah's worn boots to his scarred hands, to the rifle leaning against the porch rail to his face. Whatever Garrett saw there did not impress him, and he let that show. It was another technique, making the other man feel small by the quality of his attention. You must be Kane, the homesteader. Garrett produced a folded document from his jacket. My name is Garrett Sinclair. I have come a very long way to collect someone who belongs to me. Nobody here belongs to you. I beg to differ. Garrett unfolded the paper, held it out. This is a betrothal agreement signed by Aldrich Voss, Ara's father, granting me the right to her hand in marriage in exchange for the settlement of his considerable debts. It is witnessed, notarized, and recognized in the state of Missouri. This is not Missouri. The principle holds. A father's authority over an unmarried daughter does not stop at a state line, Mr. Kane. Garrett glanced at Ara's left hand, no ring. And as far as I can determine, Ara is not married. He smiled again. Unless something has changed since she ran away from a home I provided for her, out of my own generosity. Ara came down the porch steps. She walked past Josiah, past the gate, until she was standing 3 feet from Garrett Sinclair, close enough to smell him. Bergamot and cedar and the faint sourness beneath it that expensive cologne could not quite cover. The smell of a man who sweated through his arrogance. Give me the paper. Garrett held it out. Their fingers did not touch. Ara unfolded it, read. She had seen it before. But reading it again, standing on ground she had helped build with the porch she had nailed behind her, and the man she had chosen beside her, the words hit differently. They were smaller, thinner. The paper was just paper. The ink was just ink. The signature at the bottom. Her father's name written in a hand so drunk it could barely hold the pen, was just the mark of a broken man making a broken choice in a broken room. I know the signature, Ara said. I know it because I know my father's handwriting better than he knows it himself. When he is sober, his letters lean right. When he is drunk, they fall left. Look at this. She held the paper up. Every letter leans left. Everyone. He could not write his own name straight the night you put this in front of him. His sobriety is not my concern. No, it was your advantage. Ara folded the paper, held it back out to him. You waited until he was drunk enough to sign anything. You brought the whiskey yourself. I know because I saw the bottle on the table the next morning. French label. Aldrich Voss could not afford French wine, let alone French brandy. Her voice was steady, cold, each word a nail driven into wood. You sat in our parlor and you poured until a man who had already lost his wife could not see straight. And then you put a document in front of him that traded his daughter for his debts. Garrett took the paper. His smile was gone now. What remained was something Ara had seen many times, but only in private, behind locked doors, in rooms where no one could witness the man he actually was. A tightness around the mouth, a flatness in the eyes. The expression of a man who was accustomed to controlling every variable in a conversation and had just encountered one he could not. You stole from me when you left, Garrett said. His voice had dropped. Not to a whisper, to the low, careful register he used when he wanted her to feel the weight of every syllable. You took money from my desk. You took clothing I bought for you. You took the name I gave you shelter under. And you threw it away for this. He gestured at the cabin, the half-finished porch, the ridge, a shack on a hill with a stranger. I took what I needed to survive, and the name was never yours. It was always mine. Garrett stepped closer. Josiah's hand went to the pistol at his belt, but Ara held up her palm without turning around. A signal. Not yet. Garrett's voice went soft, tender. The voice he used in public when he wanted the world to see how much he loved her. The voice that had made neighbors smile and ministers nod, and every woman at church tell her how lucky she was. Come home, this is not your life. These people do not know you. This man does not know you. I know you. I know that you like to read by the window in the afternoon. I know that you hum when you brush your hair. I know that you are afraid of thunderstorms and that you like lavender in your tea and that you cry in your sleep. His eyes were locked on hers. I know everything about you, Ara, because I paid attention. Because I cared. Ara felt the pull. She would not lie to herself about that. The pull was real. It lived in the part of her that had been conditioned over 2 years to associate his voice with certainty, his presence with structure, his control with safety. The part that whispered, maybe he is right. Maybe you cannot do this. Maybe the ridge and the hammer and the locked door are just a longer way of arriving at the same conclusion, that you need him. You need because you are not enough on your own. She let the pull come. She felt it move through her the way a current moves through water, and then she let it pass. You did not pay attention, Garrett. You kept inventory. There is a difference. You catalog my habits the way a man catalogs livestock, so you would know if something was off, so you would know if I was planning to leave. She stepped back. One step. Her boot heel hit solid ground, the ground of broken ridge, the ground she stood on by choice. That is not love. That is surveillance. Her voice rose. You do not know me. You know the woman who lived in your house because she had no other option. You know the girl who flinched when you raised your voice and went quiet when you entered a room and learned to make herself so small that maybe you would forget she was there for a night. The baby kicked, hard enough to make her wince. That woman does not exist anymore. I killed her in a boarding house bathroom with a pair of scissors, and I am not sorry she is gone. Garrett's composure cracked, not dramatically, a hairline fracture across the surface, visible only to someone who had spent 2 years mapping every fissure in the mask. His left eye twitched, his right hand closed into a fist and opened again. The knuckles went white for half a second. You will regret this. I have regretted every day of the last 2 years. I do not think one more will break me. I will go to the territorial judge. I will present this contract. I will have a legal order compelling your return. Then go, and when you get there, explain to the judge how you obtained that contract. Explain the brandy. Explain the debts. Explain why a 22-year-old woman has a scar on her wrist in the exact shape of a leather strap. Ara pushed up her sleeve. The scar was there, white against her skin, circular, unmistakable. Explain it under oath, Garrett. I would love to hear how it sounds when you cannot control who is listening. Garrett stared at her, behind the anger, behind the fractured composure. She saw it. The thing she had always suspected lived at the center of him, coiled tight beneath the cologne and the pressed suits and the charitable donations and the smiles that never reached deeper than the skin. Fear, not fear of her, fear of a world in which she did not need him, fear that the careful architecture of ownership he had built around his life, the contracts, the debts, the locked doors, the soft voice and the hard hands, was not as solid as he believed. Fear that a woman standing on a porch she had built with her own blistered palms could look at him and feel nothing. Not hatred, not love, nothing. And nothing was the one thing Garrett Sinclair could not control. He looked past her at Josiah. This is not finished. It is for her, Josiah said. For you it ended the day she walked out your door. Garrett mounted his horse. He gathered the reins with hands that were perfectly steady because he had spent a lifetime training them not to betray him. He looked down at Ara one final time. I always get what is mine. I was never yours, Ara replied. And that is the thing that is going to keep you awake tonight. He turned the horse, rode down the trail. Ara watched him until the dust settled and the sound of hooves faded and the ridge was quiet again, except for the wind and the creak and the hammering of her own heart. Then her knees buckled. Josiah caught her. Not her arm, not her waist. He caught her elbow. The lightest possible contact. Enough to keep her upright. Not enough to make her feel held against her will. She steadied herself. He let go. You all right? No. She sat down on the top porch step. Her hands were shaking so hard she pressed them between her knees to hide it. I have never spoken to him like that. In 2 years, I never once stood in front of him and said what I actually thought. I just survived. I made myself quiet and small, and I waited for opportunities. I never fought. You fought every day, Josiah said. He sat beside her, not close enough to touch, close enough to feel present. Surviving a man like that is not the absence of fighting. It is the hardest kind. Ara leaned forward, pressed her forehead against her knees. She breathed in and out, counting the breaths the way she used to count them in St. Louis, when the footsteps stopped outside her door, and she waited to learn which version of Garrett was on the other side. But the air here was different. It smelled of pine and sage and dust in the clean, sharp scent of water from the spring. It did not smell of bergamot. It did not smell of ownership. "He will come back," Ara said. "I know. He will not come alone next time. He will bring Silas, and Silas will bring men. And they will come with paper and force and whatever else they need to make this look legal." "I know that too." Ara lifted her head, looked at him. "And we have an axe and a rifle and 40 acres of federal land." Josiah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And we have a girl named Nettie Barlow who knows where a dead woman's ring is buried." That night, Nettie came to the cabin with her arm in a sling. Her left shoulder hung wrong. Not dramatically, subtly. The joint sat lower than the other, and the girl held it close to her body the way a bird holds a broken wing. When she saw Ara, her face did something complicated. Relief and fear and shame moved across it in rapid sequence, each one arriving before the last had finished. What remained was a kind of exhaustion that no 14-year-old should know the weight of. "He found out," Nettie said. Ara brought her inside, sat her at the table. "About the ring." "Yes." "How?" "I do not know. Maybe he saw me near the ash pit. Maybe Silas told him to watch me. He came home last night and he grabbed my arm and asked what I had been doing at the forge after hours. And I said nothing. And he twisted until something popped." Nettie's voice was flat, scraped clean. "Your shoulder. It went back in on its own after a while, I think. It still moves, it just hurts." Ara knelt in front of the girl. She did not touch her. She had learned from her own years of being touched without permission that the first thing you give a person who has been hurt is the choice of whether to be reached for. "Nettie, do you still have the ring?" The girl's good hand moved to her dress pocket. She pulled out a small object, held it in her palm. A ring, silver, thin, with a tiny blue stone. The kind of ring a mother gives a daughter when there is not enough money for anything finer, but enough love to make the giving matter. "Carolyn wore this every day," Nettie said. "She told me once that her mother gave it to her the week before she died. Consumption. Carolyn said it was the only thing in the world she would never take off." Ara looked at the ring. Such a small thing. A circle of metal with a stone the color of a winter sky. But it was proof. Proof that a girl had not simply packed her bags and walked east into a new life. Proof that something had happened in this town that someone had buried in an ash pit and hoped the heat would erase. "Can you walk?" "I walked 12 miles to your ridge with a worse arm than this." "That is not what I asked." Nettie looked at her. In the dim light of that cabin, the girl's eyes were very clear. Not the eyes of a child, the eyes of a person who had been making calculations about her own survival since long before anyone gave her permission to. "I can walk," Nettie said, "but if I leave now, I cannot come back. You understand that my uncle will tell Silas. Silas will tell everyone I am a liar and a thief and whatever else he needs to say to make the town look the other way." "I know, and you are asking me to do it anyway." Ara held the girl's gaze. She thought about all the people in her own life who had asked her to be brave without telling her what bravery would cost. Her mother who taught her to shoot and said she would know when the time came. Her father who taught her nothing except how silence becomes complicity when it goes on long enough. Garrett who told her courage was knowing when to submit. "I am not asking you to be brave," Ara said. "I am asking you to be free. And I am telling you that it will cost everything you have in this room. Which from what I can name is a cream and a basin of dirty water and a door that does not lock from the inside." She paused. "I am telling you that what comes next will be harder than this room. And also better. And I am telling you that there is a porch on a ridge with a nail in it that you drove yourself. And it is still holding." Nettie pressed the ring against her chest. "The next girl," she said. "What? You said this is about the next girl, the one who comes after me, the one who shows up at the gate with nothing." "Yes." "Then I am not just walking out of this room for me. I am walking out so that when the next girl comes, there is somewhere to walk to." Ara held out her hand. Nettie took it. They left through the back window, not the front door. Ara had studied the building when she entered. There was a narrow gap between Nettie's room and the forge wall. wide enough for a woman and a girl to move through without being seen from the main street. They came out behind the livery, where Josiah was waiting with two horses. He helped Nettie onto the mare, careful around the damaged shoulder, lifting her by the waist the way he had lifted Ara that first evening at the cabin. They rode out of Elk Crossing in the last light. The town was behind them, the ridge was ahead, and the trail climbed through scrub and stone, and the sound of the creek grew louder as they ascended. Nettie sat in front of Ara, leaning back against her chest, the girl's thin body shaking with a tremor that was not cold, but the delayed release of a fear she had been holding in her muscles for years. Ara wrapped one arm around her, held the reins with the other, and she said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the silence did not say better. Two people on a horse riding toward higher ground, one who had escaped a locked room in St. Louis, one who had escaped a windowless room behind a forge, both carrying proof of what powerful men do when they believe no one is watching. The ring sat in Nettie's pocket. Caroline Meeks's ring, a dead girl's last possession, pulled from an ash pit by a child who understood that some things are too important to leave buried. When they crested the ridge, the cabin was dark except for a single light in the window. Josiah had left a lamp burning, the small, steady glow of a man who did not know when they would return but wanted them to see the way home. Nettie saw it first. "Is that for us?" "Yes," Ara said. "That is for us." Josiah was at the gate before they reached it. He had heard the hooves on the trail. He opened the gate and held the mare's bridle while Ara dismounted and helped Nettie down. He looked at the girl's arm, hanging wrong at her side. He looked at her face, drawn and pale in the lamplight. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped near his ear, but his hands were gentle when he steadied Nettie's good shoulder and guided her toward the porch. "Stew is warm, bread on the table, coffee on the stove." Nettie's voice was thin, tired, but it carried the ghost of a smile. "You always say the same thing, because it is always true." They went inside. Ara sat Nettie at the table. Josiah examined the shoulder with hands that moved with a certainty Ara had not seen before. He pressed gently along the joint. Nettie winced but did not cry. "Not dislocated," Josiah said. "Wrenched hard, strained, a sling for a week and no lifting." He looked at Ara. "I will cut cloth for the sling. You feed her." Ara set bread and stew in front of Nettie and watched the girl eat with her good hand, tears running down her face between bites. Not from pain, from the animal relief of being fed without condition, of being inside a room where no one controlled the exits, and the man who lived there had made dinner instead of fists. When Nettie finished eating, she reached into her pocket, placed Caroline Meeks's ring on the table between them. The silver caught the lamplight. The blue stone flickered like a small, cold star. Three people looked at it: a man who had buried his family and built a ridge, a woman who had escaped a cage and learned to swing a hammer, a girl who had walked out of a dark room carrying proof that the world she lived in was worse than anyone wanted to believe. "Tomorrow," Ara said, "we start building the case, every name, every date, every detail." Nettie writes down everything she knows about Caroline. I write down everything about Garrett and the contract. Josiah writes to Marshall Dunn in Cheyenne. She looked at the ring, then at them, and then we ride. But before dawn, there was something Ara needed to do, something that had been forming in her mind since the afternoon on the porch when she watched Garrett ride away and felt the old life falling off her body like a skin she had outgrown. She pulled the black morning dress from the corner of the cabin where she had left it the night she arrived. The dress her mother had never seen. The only thing she had carried from her father's house through every boarding room, every train car, every mile of the journey west. It was wrinkled and stained from travel. The hem was torn where it had caught on a nail during the ride up the ridge, but the fabric was still whole, still black, still sewn with the small, precise stitches of a woman who had died before she could see her daughter wear it. Ara spread the dress on the table. "I hate this dress," she said. Nettie looked at her. "Then change it." Ara went outside, filled a basin from the spring, mixed in lye soap and ash, the kind of mixture her mother had taught her to use for bleaching cloth. She submerged the black fabric, worked the lye through the cotton, watched the black bleed out into the water. It took 3 washings, 3 changes of water, but slowly, gradually. The black gave way to gray, and the gray gave way to something close to white, not pure white, but white enough. The color of surrender transformed into something else. She hung the dress to dry in the night air, and when the first light came, she brought it inside. Nettie handed her a needle and red thread from Josiah's mending kit. Ara began to stitch. She stitched a bird, wings spread wide across the center of the white fabric, every feather drawn in red thread. Not a specific bird, not an eagle or a dove or any creature with a name that carried someone else's symbolism. Just a bird, the simplest thing, a living creature with wings doing the only thing wings are made for. Below the bird, she stitched two hands, wrists open, the loops of rope around them broken, falling away empty. The hands were not fists. They were not reaching. They were simply open, palms up, free. And at the bottom, in stitches so small that a person would have to come close to read them, she sewed three words. Still standing here. Nettie stitched the border, one-handed, clumsy, uneven. The thread pulled in places and bunched in others. The line wandered like a road drawn by someone who had never been taught to follow straight edges. It was imperfect. It was the most beautiful needlework Ara had ever seen, because it was made by a girl who refused to let a damaged arm stop her from adding her mark to something that mattered. They finished as the first gray light appeared above the ridge. Ara held the finished piece up with both hands, her arms trembling from fatigue and something else that fatigue could not explain. The bird spread its red wings against the white cotton. The broken ropes hung empty. The words caught the first light like a promise stitched in thread. Josiah had been on the porch all night, keeping watch, the rifle across his knees, his eyes on the dark trail, his ears tuned to every sound the mountain made. When Ara came outside carrying the flag, he stood from his post and looked at it for a long time. The morning wind lifted the fabric. The wings of the bird moved as though the creature were alive, as though it were about to lift off the cloth and fly. That is not a flag, Josiah said. Ara frowned. What is it then? A declaration. She hung it from the porch beam. The wind took it immediately, stretching the fabric taut, spreading the wings wide. From the trail below, anyone riding up the ridge would see it before they saw the cabin. A white shape against the dark pine, moving in the wind. A signal, a statement, a thing that had once been a dress meant for someone else's idea of who she should be and was now a banner for who she had decided to become. Nettie came out and stood between them. Three people on an unfinished porch in the early light, bruised and tired and awake. They saddled the horses in silence. Josiah packed provisions for 3 days. Dried meat, bread, water, coffee. He packed a letter to Marshal Ezra Dunn in oilcloth and tucked it inside his shirt. Ara packed the written statements, hers and Nettie's, in the same careful way. The paper that held their truth wrapped against weather, carried close to the body. Nettie carried the ring. She had transferred it from her pocket to a leather cord around her neck, where it hung against her collarbone beneath her shirt. A dead girl's last possession, riding next to a living girl's heartbeat. Evidence and memorial in the same small circle of silver. They mounted, Ara in front, Nettie on the borrowed mule in the middle, Josiah at the rear. 3 riders moving down the ridge trail in the first gold of morning, heading south toward Cheyenne, toward a courthouse and a marshal and the terrifying machinery of a justice system that might or might not believe a woman with rope scars, a girl with a dead girl's ring, and a man who had buried his family and rebuilt his life one nail at a time. Josiah pulled up beside Ara as they reached the tree line. He looked back at the cabin. The flag was visible from here, a white shape against the dark ridge, the red wings catching the light. What if Silas comes while we are gone? Ara asked. Old Pete knows to watch the ridge, and the widow Holstead, and Emmett Tucker, who has been looking for a reason to stop being afraid. He paused. And burning a federal homestead is a hanging offense. Silas loves himself too much to swing. You are sure about that? No, but I am sure about that flag, and I am sure about what is written on it. And I am sure that whoever rides up that trail and reads those words will know that the people who lived here were not running. Ara looked at Nettie. The girl sat the mule with her good hand on the reins and her damaged arm held close, and her face set forward with an expression that had no business being on a 14-year-old and belonged there anyway. The expression of a person who has made a decision that cannot be unmade and has found peace in the impossibility of retreat. Nettie, Ara said. Yeah. When we get to Cheyenne, they are going to ask you questions, hard questions, about your uncle, about Caroline, about the ring. They are going to try to make you doubt what you know. I know what I know. I know you do, but they will push. Men in suits behind desks who have never been hit by someone who was supposed to protect them. They will use words like alleged and unsubstantiated, and they will ask you to prove things that should not need proving. Nettie looked at her. Ara, I let my uncle wrench my shoulder until something popped and I did not scream. I walked out of a windowless room and climbed onto a horse and rode up a ridge in the dark. I have been carrying a dead girl's ring in my pocket for 3 months without telling a soul. The girl's voice was steady as stone. They can ask me whatever they want. I have already answered harder questions than anything a man in a suit can think of. Ara held the girl's gaze. Then she turned forward and rode. The trail descended through scrub and dry grass. The mountains rose ahead of them, purple and vast against a sky that had no clouds in it. Behind them, the ridge grew smaller, the cabin a dark shape against the tree line, the flag a white flicker that caught the sun and threw it back. Still standing here. They reached Cheyenne on the second afternoon. The territorial office was a squat stone building near the courthouse, with a flag out front and a clerk behind a desk who looked like he had been born tired. I need to see the federal marshal, Ara said. Marshal Dunn is occupied. Then he is about to be more occupied. She set the stack of papers on the desk. Her statement, Nettie's statement, Josiah's letter. The clerk looked at the stack, then at Ara, then at Nettie with her arm in a sling and her eyes still carrying the ghost of a bruise. He stood, went through the back door. Marshal Ezra Dunn was a tall man with a silver mustache and hands that had done equal parts writing and fighting. He read Josiah's letter first. Then he looked at Josiah. Cain, I thought you were dead. Not yet. Sit down. All of you. Ara spoke for an hour. She laid out everything with the flat precision she had practiced in the cabin. Every fact a nail driven into wood. She showed him the contract, showed him her father's signature. Every letter leaning left. She showed him the scar on her wrist. She told him about Garrett, about the locked doors, about the 2 years in a house where safety was a reward for obedience and privacy was a privilege to be earned. Nettie spoke next, shorter, quieter, holding Caroline Meeks's ring in her open palm. When she described her uncle's hand on her arm and the sound her shoulder made, the marshal's pen stopped. He looked at the ring for a long time. Miss Barlow, you are telling me this ring belonged to a woman who has been missing for 5 months. I am telling you it was buried in the ash pit of the forge where my uncle works. Caroline Meeks never took that ring off. Not once in her life. The marshal turned to Josiah. The other man, Sinclair. He is in Elk Crossing right now. He is working with Silas Whitmore. He carries a betrothal contract signed by her father while incapacitated. He has been to a territorial judge already, trying to get a legal order to compel her return. He came 2 days ahead of us, Ara said. I expect he is in this building already. Dunn leaned back. He is. He filed a petition yesterday with Judge Harland. I read it this morning. Ara felt the ground shift, but she did not let it take her. Then read this. She held up the betrothal contract she had taken from Garrett at the gate and kept folded in her pocket since. Look at the signature. Every letter leans left. My father is right-handed. When sober, his hand leans right. When drunk past the point of standing, it falls left. This document was obtained from a man who could not consent to his own name. Dunn studied the paper. He studied Ara's wrist where the scar from the leather strap was visible below her cuff. He studied Nettie's sling and bruised face. Miss Voss, what you are describing is fraud, assault, unlawful restraint, and possibly something a good deal worse regarding Miss Meeks. He set down his pen. I can have warrants drawn by morning. For Silas Whitmore, his mother Edna Whitmore, the blacksmith Barlow, and Garrett Sinclair. He looked at Ara. Mr. Sinclair's petition is denied. This contract is not worth the paper it is written on, and I will tell Judge Harlan so myself. Ara gripped the arms of the chair. Something released inside her that had been locked tight for years. Not joy, relief of the kind that comes after a weight so long carried that the body has forgotten what it feels like to stand straight. They stayed one night in Cheyenne. In the morning, Marshal Dunn rode for Elk Crossing with 4 deputies. Ara and Josiah and Nettie rode for the ridge. When they crested the last hill and saw the cabin below, Ara pulled the horse to a stop. The flag was still flying, but beside the cabin, framed in fresh-cut pine, stood the skeleton of a second building, half-walled, foundation level and true. And on the porch of the original cabin, old Pete sat in a chair with his cane across his knees. Beside him, the widow Holstead was stacking canned goods on a shelf that had not existed when they left. "What is that?" Ara called from the ridge. Josiah looked up from below. He had ridden ahead while she stopped. He stood at the gate with his hand on the post, and something on his face she had not seen before. Not a smile. The place where a smile would go when a man who had forgotten how to make one felt the muscles begin to remember. "You said you wanted a second cabin for the next one who comes." Ara rode down. She dismounted, walked to the new structure, ran her hand along the timber. Fresh pine, clean joints, solid. "It needs a name," Nettie said, coming up beside her. "All of it. The homestead, the play, what we are building here." Ara looked at the flag, the white dress remade, the red bird spreading its wings. "Red Bird Ridge," she said. Josiah carved the sign that evening. He nailed it to the gate in the last gold light while Ara stood beside him with her hand on his arm. The words read, "Red Bird Ridge. All are welcome, none are owned." That night they sat on the finished porch. Ara and Josiah at one end, Nettie reading a book Miss Granger had brought up the ridge, old Pete dozing in his chair. Ara reached for Josiah's hand, not because she was falling, not because she needed steadying, because she chose to. Because choosing to reach for someone was different from being pulled. And she finally understood the difference in her bones. His rough fingers closed around hers, gentle and firm. He did not pull her closer. He simply held on. "Josiah, yeah, thank you for the cabin, for the door, for not asking me to be small. You were never small, Ara. The world just kept trying to fit you in a smaller room." She leaned against his shoulder, the first time she had leaned against anyone by choice in longer than she could measure. The baby kicked, hard. Ara took Josiah's hand, placed it on her belly. The baby kicked again. Josiah's eyes went wide, then soft. "Strong," he said, "like her mother." Her guia. "I know." They sat in silence. The stars came out. The wind moved through the grass, somewhere below the ridge, in a town that had held its breath too long. Marshal Ezra Dunn and 4 deputies were knocking on doors. But on Broken Ridge, in a cabin built for ghosts and inhabited by survivors, a woman who had spent her life being told she was property sat beside a man who had lost everything. And they made a decision together, without ceremony, without romance, without any of the words the world uses to make such moments pretty. They decided to stay. Word came by rider 3 weeks later. Silas Whitmore, convicted. 7 years territorial prison. Edna Whitmore, convicted. 3 years. Barlow, convicted of assault on a minor. 5 years. Garrett Sinclair, contract voided. Expelled from the territory under threat of federal prosecution. Ara read the letter twice. Then she burned it, because the words on paper meant nothing compared to what happened next. Garrett Sinclair was a man who did not lose, and he was not going to start now. He came on the last day of August, not alone this time, with Silas Whitmore and 10 men. They came before the marshal's deputies could arrive to enforce the warrants. They came in the hour between verdict and justice, when the law is just words on paper and men with guns make their own rules. Ara was inside the cabin when she heard the horses, 12 of them. She went to the window, saw them coming up the trail, Garrett at the front, Silas beside him, and behind them 10 men who had been paid enough not to ask questions. The baby was nearly 9 months now, her belly enormous. She could barely move without effort, but she moved. She went to the door, took down the Winchester rifle from above the frame, checked the load, 6 rounds, stepped onto the porch. Josiah was already there, pistol on his belt, rifle in his hands. The riders stopped 20 yards out. Garrett dismounted. Last chance, Ara. The judge's ruling will not stand. I have lawyers in St. Louis already filing appeals. You can come now with dignity, or we can take you. You are not taking anyone, Josiah said. Silas smiled. Mr. Kane, we have a writ, signed by a judge in Laramie. It says Ara Voss is to be remanded to the custody of Garrett Sinclair, pending resolution of the betrothal contract. Your writ is worth nothing. Marshal Dunn voided that contract. Marshal Dunn is 2 days away. We are here now. The 10 men behind them drew their guns, all pointed at the cabin, at Ara. Ara raised the Winchester. Her hands shook. She could not stop them from shaking. The baby kicked so hard she gasped, but she aimed. I ran 1,000 miles to get away from you. If I die today, I die here, but you die first. Garrett's face went hard. Take her. The men started forward. Josiah fired. The shot went over their heads. Warning, they stopped. Next one does not miss, Josiah said. Garrett pulled his own pistol, aimed it at Josiah. Then we both shoot and see who is left standing. Ara's finger tightened on the trigger. The wind gusted. The flag cracked like a whip. Everything hung in that breath. And then, from down the trail, the sound of more horses. Marshal Ezra Dunn, 4 deputies, riding hard. They came up behind Garrett's men, surrounded them. Dunn's voice carried clear and cold. Garrett Sinclair, Silas Whitmore, you are both under arrest. Drop your weapons, now. Garrett's gun wavered. He looked at Ara, one last time, with all the hatred of a man who had been told no and could not accept it. This is not over. Yes, it is, Ara said. Dunn's deputies moved in, disarmed the men, bound their hands, led them away. Garrett and Silas, both in chains, both silent. When they were gone, when the dust settled, when the ridge was quiet again, Ura's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the porch. The rifle clattered beside her. And then, pain, sharp, low, unmistakable. Josiah, he was beside her in an instant. What is it? The baby, she is coming. His face went white. Now. Widow Holstead was already running up from the second cabin. She had been waiting for this. They got Ara inside. Later on the bed, Josiah stood at the door, unable to enter, unable to leave. The same way he had stood when Lorelei labored with Samuel, and when the screaming started. When Ara's voice rose high and desperate and furious, he sat on the porch with his head in his hands and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore. Hours passed, the sun set, stars came out, and then a different cry. Small, new, fierce. Josiah stood. Widow Holstead opened the door. You can come in now. He walked into the cabin. Ara lay on the bed, exhausted, hair plastered to her forehead, but alive, and in her arms. A baby girl, tiny, red-faced, screaming, perfect. Ara looked up at him, smiled through tears. Her name is Lorelei. Josiah knelt beside the bed. He had not cried when his wife died, had not cried when Samuel died. He cried now. You did not have to. I wanted to. Your wife taught you how to be the man who saved me, and this baby deserves the name of a strong woman. She held the baby out to him. Josiah took her, held his daughter. Not by blood, by choice. The baby quieted in his arms, looked up at him with eyes that had not yet decided what color they would be. Welcome home, Lorelei, he whispered. Outside. The flag flew. Inside. A family began. 10 years later. Redbird Ridge had grown. 5 cabins now, scattered across the hillside. Ara stood at the gate, 32 years old, watching the trail. In the years after that August standoff, Redbird Ridge became more than a refuge. It became a home. Ara and Josiah married the following spring in a small ceremony with Nettie as witness. Marshal Ezra Dunn officiated. Old Pete played fiddle. 2 years later, their son Samuel was born. 3 years after that, their daughter Emma arrived. Now Lorelei was 10, Samuel 7, Emma 4. 3 children who knew nothing of locked doors or men who believed ownership was love. A woman was coming up the trail. Young, maybe 20, with a baby in her arms and nothing else. She stopped at the gate, looked up at the flag, the red bird, the broken ropes, read the sign, Red Bird Ridge. All are welcome, none are owned. This the place, she asked. The woman at the trading post told me about it, said there was a flag. Ara opened the gate. This is the place. What is your name? Sarah. And this is Anna. Come inside, Sarah. You are safe now. The woman followed her through the gate. Behind them, Lorelei sat on the porch with Samuel and Emma, watching, learning, that this was what strength looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand when you could run, to build when you could break, to open the gate when you could close it. Ara turned to Josiah. He stood in the doorway of the first cabin, gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes, but still standing, still here. Another one, he asked. Another one. He smiled. Then we will need more firewood. Nettie came out from the second cabin, 24 years old now, a teacher at the school in Elk Crossing. The town had changed since Silas fell, slower than anyone wanted, faster than anyone expected. She carried a bundle of blankets. For the baby, she said to Sarah, we keep extras. You will need them when the nights turn cold. Sarah took the blankets, held them against her chest. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank us, Ara said. You just need to rest. And when you are ready, when you feel strong enough, you can help the next one who comes. Sarah looked around, at the cabins, at the children, at the women moving between buildings, at the flag flying white and red against the sky. How many have come? 17, Nettie said. Not counting you. Some stayed, some left when they were ready, but they all knew they could come back. And the men who hurt them, some are in prison, Ara said. Some ran, some learned. The world is changing. Slowly, but it is changing. She put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. Come, let us get you settled. They walked toward the second cabin. Behind them, Josiah began splitting wood, the steady rhythm of the axe. The same rhythm Ara had heard her first morning on the ridge. Lorelei came and stood beside her mother. Mama, why do the women always come alone? Ara looked down at her daughter, 10 years old, born the day Ara learned that standing still could be the bravest thing a person does. Because sometimes the only person who can save you is yourself. But that does not mean you have to do it alone. Will I have to run someday? I hope not. Your father and I, Nettie and old Pete and the widow Holstead and everyone who built this place. We are building it so that girls like you will not have to run, so that you can stand wherever you are and be safe. Lorelei thought about this. But if I do have to run, I should run here. Yes, because this is home. Yes. Samuel came running from the barn, 7 years old, named for the son Josiah lost. The son who taught Josiah that love does not die. It changes. It grows. It makes room for new love without forgetting the old. Papa says we need to build a fourth cabin by next summer. Does he now? He says more will come. He says the word is spreading. Ara looked at the ridge, at the cabins, at the flag. The word was spreading. In boarding houses and churches, in markets and train stations. A whispered name passed between women who knew what it meant to be watched, to be owned, to be small. Red Bird Ridge, where the door locks from the inside, where no one asks where you came from, where the only thing required is that you hand the hammer to the next person who needs it. The sun set over Red Bird Ridge, the flag flew, and the gate stayed open, because some doors are meant to lock, and some are meant to welcome. And the women who built this place knew the difference. Ara walked to where Josiah was stacking wood. She did not say anything. She just stood beside him, and he reached for her hand, and they stood together. As the stars came out, as the children played, as the newest refugee settled into the second cabin and learned, for the first time in however long, what it felt like to close a door from the inside, to test the lock, to know it would hold. Ara thought about the girl she had been, 3 months pregnant, 6 months pregnant, 9 months pregnant with a rifle in her hands. She thought about Garrett Sinclair, somewhere east, living with the knowledge that he had lost, that a woman he believed he owned had looked at him and felt nothing. She thought about the contract her father had signed, burned now, ash scattered to the wind. She thought about Thaddeus, her first husband, the father of Lorelei, gone too soon, but not forgotten. She thought about every woman who had walked through that gate, every story, every scar, every locked door they had escaped. And she thought about the women who would come, tomorrow, next week, next year, the ones who would see the flag from the trail below, the white fabric with the red bird, the broken ropes, the three words, still standing here. And they would know they had found the place where standing still was not surrender, where staying was not weakness, where a woman with a rifle and a swollen belly could look at 12 men on horseback and say, "You will not take me," and mean it. Josiah squeezed her hand. "You all right?" Ara smiled. "Yeah, I'm all right." And she was. For the first time in her life, she was all right. The stars burned fierce above Redbird Ridge. The wind carried the scent of pine and sage and bread baking in the widow Holstead's oven. And the flag flew, white against the darkness, red wings spread wide, free.